The massive bio ship appeared in space above New Terra Station, like a bleeding wound against the stars, and its hull showed deep scars that glowed with strange blue light, while thick silver liquid dripped from its damaged sections into the endless void of space. And Commander Blake Torres watched from the station's main observation deck as the ship slowly moved toward their docking bay with movements that seemed tired and desperate. The ship itself was unlike anything most humans had ever seen because it was grown rather than built, and its surface rippled with what looked like muscle and bone covered in dark metal that seemed to breathe with each pulse of the internal lights, and Torres could see smaller creatures fly around the ship like protective birds trying to keep their wounded mother safe from further harm. When the docking bay doors finally opened with a loud hiss of pressurizing air, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and a sweet smell filled the air that reminded Torres of flowers mixed with something sharp and metallic that made his nose tingle, and then she appeared. Queen Lyra of the Veltar Empire stepped onto the station's metal floor, and Torres immediately understood why his people called her species the most beautiful and terrifying race in the galaxy, because she stood nearly 8 feet tall with 6 arms that moved with perfect grace, and her skin was pale blue with silver markings that seemed to shift and change as she walked, and her eyes were large and completely black, like looking into deep space itself. But it was what she carried in her arms that made everyone in the docking bay step backward in fear, because cradled against her chest like a dying child was Nyx the Terror of the Outer Rim, and the most dangerous creature known to the galaxy. And the dragon was smaller than Torres had expected, being only about the size of a large horse, but her presence filled the entire room with a feeling of power that made his teeth ache. Nyx looked like she was made from living shadow and starlight because her scales were completely black, but somehow they seemed to contain tiny points of light like a night sky. And when she moved, those points shifted and swirled in patterns that hurt to look at for too long, and silver blood dripped from cracks in her scales on a floor where it hissed and bubbled before disappearing into wisps of smoke. The dragon was clearly in terrible pain because she made soft whimpering sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and her body flickered in and out of sight like a broken hologram, and every few seconds the air around her would shimmer and bend in ways that made Torres feel dizzy and sick to his stomach. Queen Lyra spoke in a voice that sounded like music mixed with thunder, and the station's translation system worked hard to turn her words into something humans could understand. And she said that she had come to New Terra Station because she had nowhere else to go, and every major medical facility in 3 star systems had already refused to help her save Nyx. The queen explained that her dragon was not just her mount or her weapon, but her sister, and they had been bonded together since childhood through ancient Veltar magic that connected their minds and souls. And if Nyx died, then Lyra would die too, because the breaking of their bond would tear her mind apart from the inside. Torres watched as the proud queen who ruled 17 star systems and commanded fleets that could destroy planets fought back tears, while she begged a small human space station to save the life of her dying sister. And he could see that this was not about politics or war, but about love between 2 beings who had shared their entire lives together. The medical team that Torres had called to the docking bay stood frozen with fear, because they could all feel the power radiating from Nyx even in her weakened state, and Dr. Martinez, the chief medical officer, kept shaking his head and muttering about how treating the dragon would be impossible because her biology was completely unknown, and her ability to phase between dimensions made any kind of surgery incredibly dangerous. Queen Lyra tried to explain what had happened to Nyx, and her words painted a picture of an ancient creature that lived in the space between stars and fed on the energy of dying suns. And this Leviathan had attacked without warning, while Nyx was protecting a convoy of refugee ships, and the battle had lasted for hours across multiple dimensions before Nyx finally drove the creature away, but not before it had torn deep wounds in her, scales, and left fragments of its crystalline body embedded in her flesh. The queen said that these crystal fragments were slowly poisoning Nyx from the inside and causing her to lose control of her dimensional abilities, and soon she would either die from the poison or tear herself apart trying to escape into dimensions where living creatures could not survive. Torres felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him because he knew that helping Nyx could be seen as supporting the Veltar Empire's military expansion, and many species in the galaxy feared and hated the dragon riders for their power and their seemingly endless conquest of new worlds, but refusing to help could trigger a war that would destroy half the known galaxy. As he watched Queen Lyra hold her dying sister, Torres remembered stories his grandmother used to tell him about wounded animals back on old Earth, and how sometimes the most dangerous creatures were just scared and hurting, and needed someone brave enough to look past their reputation and see the pain underneath. The station's medical AI had been running calculations since the Queen arrived, and now it announced that attempting to treat Nyx had a 97% chance of catastrophic failure that could destroy the entire station and kill everyone on board because the dragon's unstable dimensional abilities could create tears in space-time that would be impossible to control. But Torres also noticed something that the AI had missed because he was looking at Queen Lyra's face and seeing the same expression that his own mother had worn when his little sister was sick with fever and near death, and he realized that underneath all the politics and fear was something much simpler and more universal than anyone wanted to admit. Dr. Martinez continued to list all the reasons why treating Nyx was impossible and dangerous, while other members of the medical team nodded in agreement and spoke about liability issues and safety protocols and insurance regulations. But Torres found himself thinking about what it would feel like to watch someone you love die, while people who could help chose not to because it was too risky or politically complicated. The dragon made another soft cry of pain, and the sound seemed to cut through all the technical discussions and political concerns like a knife through cloth, and Torres saw Queen Lyra's shoulders shake as she whispered something in her own language that the translation system could not process, but that sounded like a lullaby or a prayer. Nyx opened her eyes for a moment, and Torres saw that they were like looking into deep space filled with swirling galaxies and dying stars, and there was intelligence there and pain, but also something that looked almost like hope as the dragon looked around the room at all the humans who were discussing her fate. The Queen explained that if no one would help, then she would perform the traditional death flight, where she and Nyx would fly their ship directly into the nearest star, so they could die together as they had lived. But Torres could hear in her voice that this was not what she wanted, but simply the only option left to her. As Queen Lyra began to turn away with Nyx still flickering in and out of reality, Torres made a decision that would change everything. Because sometimes the right choice was not the safe choice or the smart choice, but simply the choice that let you sleep at night, knowing you had done everything you could to help someone who needed it. He told the Queen to wait, because maybe there was still one more option they had not considered yet, and maybe New Terra Station was different from all those other medical facilities, because sometimes humans did things that other species thought were impossible or crazy, and sometimes that was exactly what the situation required. While Commander Torres tried to think of options that did not exist, Dr. Elena Vasquez watched from the back of the crowd and studied the wounded dragon with eyes that had seen pain in creatures that others called monsters, and she had spent 15 years as the station's chief veterinarian treating everything from the massive ice bears that miners brought back from frozen planets to the genetically modified war dogs that soldiers used in combat. Elena had grown up on a farm on Earth where her family raised animals that most people were afraid of, including the giant wolves that had been brought back from extinction and the flying serpents that her grandfather used to hunt wild boar in the mountains, and she learned early that size and reputation meant nothing when a creature was suffering and needed help. She pushed through the crowd of medical personnel, who were all talking about why treating Nyx was impossible, and walked up to Commander Torres, who looked surprised to see the station's animal doctor volunteering for what everyone else considers suicide mission. And Elena told him quietly that she had been studying the dragon's behavior and movements, and she thought she might understand something that everyone else was missing. Dr. Martinez immediately started explaining why a veterinarian could not possibly treat an alien dragon that could phase between dimensions, and that the medical complexity was far beyond anything Elena had ever encountered. But she interrupted him and said that pain was the same in every living creature, whether it had 2 legs or 4 or 6, and whether it came from Earth or the far side of the galaxy. Elena had been watching how Nyx moved and breathed, and how her dimensional flickering happened in patterns that reminded her of animals she had treated before, and she explained that the dragon's phase shifting was not random or aggressive, but followed the same patterns that Earth animals showed when they were scared and trying to hide from threats. The veterinarian told the group that she had once treated a wounded bear that had been shot by poachers, and the animal kept trying to turn invisible, using its natural camouflage, even though the ability was making its injuries worse. And Elena realized that Nyx was doing the same thing by instinctively trying to escape into other dimensions whenever she felt threatened or experienced pain. Queen Lyra had been listening to the humans debate, and now she looked at Elena with interest, because no one else had suggested that Nyx's dimensional abilities might be defensive rather than offensive, and the Queen asked Elena what she meant, and the veterinarian explained her theory about fear responses and pain management in wounded animals. Elena said that back on Earth, they had learned that animals with supernatural abilities often lost control of those abilities when they were badly hurt, and that the key to treating them was not to fight against their natural defenses, but to work with them and make the animal feel safe enough to stop, try and protect itself. Dr. Martinez laughed and said that Elena was comparing a space dragon that could destroy starships to farm animals, and that her simple veterinary techniques would never work on a creature that existed in multiple dimensions at once. But Elena had been thinking about this problem since the Queen first arrived, and she had some ideas that might work. The veterinarian explained that she had been studying the station's archives about dimensional physics, and she discovered that Earth animals had some unique properties that scientists did not fully understand, because human neural patterns seem to be more flexible than other species when dealing with spatial distortions and reality shifts. Elena had read reports about human pilots who could navigate through dimensional storms that drove other species insane, and about human engineers who could repair equipment that existed partially in other dimensions, and she wondered if the same flexibility that let humans adapt to alien environments might also let them work with creatures like Nyx. Ambassador Kane from the Helios Republic had been watching discussion, and now he stepped forward to remind everyone that helping the terror of the Outer Rim would be seen as an act of war by many species in the galaxy, and that New Terra Station could face economic sanctions and military threats if they chose to treat the dragon. The ambassador listed all the worlds that Nyx had attacked and all the ships she had destroyed, and he said that showing mercy to such a dangerous creature would send the wrong message to the galaxy and encourage other aggressive species to think that humans were weak and could be manipulated through emotional appeals. But Elena had been doing her own research into Nyx's reputation, and she found something interesting in the reports because when she looked at the actual details of the dragon's attacks, she noticed patterns that did not match what people claimed about her being a mindless weapon of destruction. The veterinarian told the group that according to the shipping records, she had accessed most of Nyx's so-called attacks had happened near known pirate strongholds or in areas where slave traders operated, and that many of the ships she destroyed had been carrying illegal cargo or weapons, and Elena wondered if maybe the dragon was not attacking innocent vessels, but protecting them from criminals. Queen Lyra's eyes widened when Elena mentioned this because no one had ever bothered to look at the context of Nyx's actions, and the Queen said that Elena was right, and that her dragon had spent years helping refugee ships escape from pirates and rescuing research stations that were under attack by raiders. The Queen explained that the Veltar Empire's expansion was not about conquest, but about evacuation, because there was something coming from the edge of the galaxy that was consuming entire star systems, and her people had been fighting a losing war against machine entities that turned planets into raw materials for building more machines. Ambassador Kane dismissed this explanation as propaganda and said that everyone knew the Veltar were aggressive conquerors who used their dragons to intimidate peaceful species. But Elena found herself believing Queen Lyra because the pain in her voice when she talked about her dying sister was too real to be an act. Dr. Martinez continued to argue that treating Nyx was medically impossible because they did not have the right equipment or knowledge to work on a creature that could phase between dimensions, but Elena had been thinking about this problem, and she had some ideas about how human medical techniques might be adapted for unusual patients. The veterinarian explained that she had once performed surgery on a creature that could become temporarily invisible, and she had learned to work by feel and instinct rather than relying only on what she could see, and she thought the same approach might work with Nyx if she could find a way to partially sync with the dragon's dimensional state. Elena said that humans seem to have an unusual ability to maintain consciousness and coordination even when reality around them was shifting, and that maybe this was because human brains were naturally adapted to handle multiple sensory inputs and conflicting information without breaking down. The station's medical AI interrupted to say that Elena's theories were based on speculation rather than proven science, and that attempting to synchronize with Nyx's dimensional abilities could result in Elena's death or worse, because no organic being had ever survived partial phase shifting. But Elena remembered her grandmother's stories about the old veterinarians who worked with Earth's most dangerous animals before modern technology made everything safe and predictable, and how those doctors had learned to trust their instincts and form connections with creatures that others feared. Queen Lyra asked Elena if she really thought she could help Nyx, and the veterinarian admitted that she was not sure, but that she had never met an animal she could not at least try to help, and that sometimes trying was the only thing that mattered because giving up meant accepting that some lives were worth less than others. The Queen studied Elena's face for a long moment, and then asked what Elena would need to attempt the surgery, and the veterinarian said that most of her equipment was designed for Earth animals, but that the basic principles of surgery were the same everywhere, and that she could adapt her tools if she had access to the station's industrial fabricators. Commander Torres realized that Elena was serious about attempting to treat Nix, and he asked if she understood the risks not just of herself, but of everyone on the station, because if something went wrong during the surgery, the resulting dimensional instability could tear holes in space-time that would destroy everything within several light years. Elena said that she understood the risks, but that she also understood what it felt like to watch a creature suffer when you had the ability to help, and that she would rather die trying to save a life than live knowing she had chosen safety over compassion. Dr. Martinez made one final attempt to talk Elena out of her plan by explaining all the ways that dragon physiology was different from Earth animals and how her simple veterinary tools would be useless against injuries that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But Elena just smiled and said that pain was still pain no matter how complicated the creature feeling it. Queen Lyra looked around the room at all the humans who were arguing about politics and safety and liability, and then she looked back at Elena, who was standing quietly with determination written on her face, and the Queen made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. The Queen knelt down so that she was at Elena's eye level and said that she would accept the veterinarian's help, and that she would perform the blood-bonding ritual that would temporarily link Elena's mind to both herself and Nix, so that the human could understand the dragon's biology well enough to attempt the surgery. Ambassador Kane immediately objected and said that allowing a Veltar blood bond was against every diplomatic protocol and could be seen as humans joining the enemy alliance, but Elena had already made up her mind, and she told the Queen that she was ready to try anything that might save Nix's life. Commander Torres looked around the room at his medical staff, who were shaking their heads, and his diplomatic personnel, who were warning about political consequences, and his security team, who were calculating blast radii. And then he looked at Elena, who was calmly preparing to risk everything to help a creature that most of the galaxy feared. Torres made a decision that would either save 2 lives or destroy his station, and he told Elena that she had his permission to attempt the surgery, and that he would deal with the political consequences later, because sometimes doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. Elena worked through the night to prepare what she called her operating theater, but which looked more like a disaster zone to anyone who understood proper medical procedures, because she had taken over Cargo Bay 7 and filled it with equipment that was never designed to work together, including mining scanners that she modified to see through dimensional shifts and industrial radiation shielding that she hoped would protect her from the worst effects of Nix's unstable energy field. The veterinarian had convinced the station's engineers to help her by explaining that they were not just trying to save one dragon, but potentially preventing a war that could destroy their homes and families. And slowly the crew began to understand that Elena's crazy plan might be their only chance to avoid a conflict that would tear the galaxy apart. Queen Lyra spent hours explaining Veltar blood-bonding rituals to Elena and warning her about the dangers of linking minds with creatures whose thoughts moved in patterns that human brains were never meant to process. And the Queen said that most people who attempted the bond with a dragon either died instantly or went insane from experiencing consciousness that existed in multiple dimensions at once. But Elena had been preparing for this possibility by practicing meditation techniques that her grandmother had taught her for calming frightened animals, and she discovered that the same breathing patterns and mental exercises that helped her connect with Earth creatures might also work with beings from other worlds. The Queen explained that the blood bond would create a temporary psychic link between Elena and both herself and Nix, and that this connection would allow Elena to understand a dragon's biology and pain in ways that no medical scanner could reveal, but that it would also mean experiencing every sensation that Nix felt, including the agony from her wounds. Elena asked what would happen if she could not handle the psychic connection, and Queen Lyra admitted that the bond might burn out Elena's mind or trap her consciousness in the dimensional space between realities where she would exist forever in a state of living death, but Elena just nodded and said that some risks were worth taking. The surgery preparation took 3 days, during which time Nix's condition continued to deteriorate and her dimensional flickering became more violent and unpredictable, and twice she accidentally phased parts of the station's hull into other dimensions, creating holes that had to be quickly patched before the atmosphere escaped into space. Dr. Martinez continued to argue that Elena's plan was medical suicide and that she was to get everyone killed, but Commander Torres backed the veterinarian's decision and ordered his crew to give her whatever support she needed, even if it meant converting half the station into a makeshift medical facility. Elena spent hours studying Nyx from a safe distance, and she noticed that the dragon's phase shifting followed patterns that reminded her of animals in pain, because wounded creatures often moved in repetitive ways that provided comfort or relief, and she realized that Nyx was unconsciously trying to shift the damaged parts of her body into dimensions where the pain might be less intense. The veterinarian also observed that Nyx responded positively to Queen Lyra's presence, and that the dragon's dimensional flickering became more stable when her bonded partner was nearby, and Elena understood that the emotional connection between Queen and Dragon was not just spiritual, but had real physical effects on Nyx's ability to control her powers. On the morning of the surgery, Elena felt surprisingly calm because she had spent her entire career treating animals that others considered too dangerous or too difficult, and she knew that fear and uncertainty were normal parts of any difficult procedure, and that the key was to focus on the patient rather than on all the things that could go wrong. Queen Lyra performed the blood-bonding ritual in the center of the makeshift operating theater, and Elena felt a sharp pain as the queen's ceremonial blade cut her palm and mixed her blood with silver drops from both Lyra and Nyx, and immediately Elena's world exploded into sensations that no human had ever experienced before. The psychic connection hit Elena like being struck by lightning, and suddenly she could feel Nyx's pain, as if it were her own, and the agony was so intense that she almost screamed, but she forced herself to breathe slowly and accept the sensation rather than fighting against it, because she knew that resistance would make everything worse. Through the bond, Elena experienced Nyx's memories and emotions, and she was amazed to discover that the dragon was not the mindless weapon that the galaxy believed her be, but a creature with deep feelings and complex thoughts who genuinely cared about protecting innocent people from the dangers that lurked in space. Elena saw through Nyx's eyes the battles against pirates and slavers and the long flights through deep space to rescue stranded ships, and she felt the dragon's satisfaction when she saved lives and her sorrow when she arrived too late to help, and Elena realized that Nyx's fearsome reputation came from her enemy's propaganda rather than from her actual actions. The bond also connected Elena to Queen Lyra, and through the Queen's mind, Elena experienced the deep love and trust that existed between the two sisters, and she understood that their relationship was built on years of shared danger and mutual sacrifice, and that losing Nyx would destroy not just Lyra's life, but her soul. But Elena also felt something else through the connection, because her human neural patterns seemed to create a stabilizing effect on the psychic link, and instead of being overwhelmed by alien thoughts, she found that her mind was adapting and learning to process the dimensional sensations that Nyx experienced naturally. The surgery began with Elena using her modified medical scanners to locate the crystal fragments that were poisoning Nyx from the inside, and she discovered that the pieces of the space Leviathan had embedded themselves not just in the dragon's physical body, but in the dimensional spaces that Nyx used for phase shifting. Elena realized that removing the fragments would require her to partially enter Nyx's dimensional state and work in spaces that existed between normal reality and other planes of existence, and she would have to perform surgery, while her own body was shifting in and out of multiple dimensions simultaneously. The veterinarian began the procedure by following Nyx's natural phase shifting patterns and allowing her consciousness to flow with the dragon's movements between dimensions, and she discovered that her human brain's pattern recognition abilities helped her navigate the shifting reality in ways that more rigid alien minds might not be able to handle. As Elena worked, she found that the psychic bond was teaching her things about Nyx's biology that no medical textbook could have explained, and she could feel where the crystal fragments were causing the most damage, and she could sense which dimensional spaces were safe to enter and which ones would tear her apart if she made a mistake. The first fragment that Elena removed was buried deep in Nyx's chest near what seemed to be her heart, and the veterinarian had to phase her hand into a dimension where the dragon's ribs became translucent, while keeping her surgical tools anchored in normal reality, and the process required a level of mental coordination that should have been impossible for any organic being. Nyx's pain screams during the surgery created psychic shockwaves that shattered windows throughout the station and caused several crew members to collapse with severe headaches, but Elena barely noticed because she was completely focused on her patient and on the delicate work of removing alien poison from a creature that existed in multiple realities at once. Elena discovered that her human intuition was perfectly suited for this type of surgery, because while alien medical computers tried to calculate exact measurements and probabilities, Elena could simply feel where the fragments needed to be removed and trust her instincts to guide her hands to the right places. The second fragment was more difficult because it had grown into Nyx's nervous system, and removing it required Elena to work inside the dragon's dimensional perception centers, and she had to learn to see reality the way Nyx saw it with multiple layers of existence all happening at the same time. Through the psychic bond, Elena experienced what it was like to be a creature that could exist in several dimensions simultaneously, and she was amazed by the beauty and complexity of Nyx's perception of the universe, and she understood that dimensional phase shifting was not just a defensive ability, but a completely different way of experiencing existence. As Elena removed each fragment, she felt Nyx's pain decreasing, and the dragon's dimensional flickering became more controlled and stable, and Elena realized that the crystal poison had been preventing Nyx from properly controlling her abilities and causing her to phase shift randomly when she was trying to remain in normal space. The most dangerous part of the surgery came when Elena had to remove the largest fragment, which had lodged itself in the space between Nyx's primary consciousness and her dimensional awareness, and working in this area meant that Elena was operating directly on the dragon's ability to think and perceive reality. Elena knew that one wrong move could permanently damage Nyx's mind or trap the dragon in a dimensional space where she could never return, but the psychic bond gave Elena access to Nyx's own understanding of her biology, and the dragon's trust flowed through the connection to guide Elena's hands. The final fragment came free with a sound like breaking crystal, and Elena felt a wave of relief flow through both Nyx and Queen Lyra as the poison that had been slowly killing the dragon was finally removed and Nyx's dimensional abilities stabilized for the first time since her battle with the Space Leviathan. But as Elena finished the surgery, she realized that something unexpected had happened during the procedure, because the psychic bond that was supposed to be temporary had become permanent, and she could still feel the thoughts and emotions of both Nyx and Queen Lyra flowing through her mind. Elena discovered that her human neural patterns had somehow synchronized with the Veltar bonding magic in a way that no one had thought possible, and instead of burning out her mind to connection, had actually enhanced her abilities and given her insights into dimensional physics that human science had never achieved. The surgery was complete and Nyx was healing, but Elena knew that her life had been changed forever because she was now linked to two alien beings in ways that would let her understand the universe from perspectives that no human had ever experienced, and she felt ready for whatever challenges this new connection might bring. Elena woke up 3 days after the surgery with a headache that felt like someone had rewired her brain while she was sleeping, and when she opened her eyes, she could see the world in ways that humans were never meant to see because the permanent psychic link with Nyx and Queen Lyra had given her the ability to perceive multiple dimensions at once. The veterinarian found herself knowing things that she had never learned and understanding concepts that human science had barely begun to explore, and when she looked at the walls of her medical bay, she could see the quantum fluctuations that held matter together and the dimensional threads that connected every object to its counterparts in parallel realities. Commander Torres came to check on Elena and was amazed to find that she seemed perfectly healthy despite having undergone a psychic bonding process that should have killed her or driven her insane. And Elena explained that her human brain had adapted to the alien connection in ways that surprised even Queen Lyra, who had never seen a successful permanent bond with anyone outside her own species. Elena discovered that she could communicate with Nyx without speaking, and that the dragon's thoughts came to her as images and emotions rather than words, and through this connection she learned the truth about Nyx's past, and the real reason why the galaxy feared the dragon riders of the Veltar Empire. Through Nyx's memories, Elena saw the first time the dragon had encountered what the galaxy called pirates, but what Nyx knew were actually slave ships carrying captured children from colonies that had been raided by organized criminal networks, and Elena felt Nyx's rage and determination as the dragon attacked the slavers and freed their prisoners. Elena experienced dozens of similar memories through the psychic link, and she realized that every single one of Nyx's so-called unprovoked attacks had actually been rescue missions or defensive actions against criminals who preyed on innocent travelers, and that the dragon had never once harmed a ship that was not engaged in illegal activities. The veterinarian shared these revelations with Commander Torres, who listened with growing amazement as Elena described battles against pirate fleets and rescue operations for stranded research vessels and protective escorts for refugee convoys. And Torres began to understand that everything the galaxy believed about Nyx was based on lies spread by the criminals she had been fighting. Elena also learned through Queen Lyra's memories that the Veltar Empire's expansion across the galaxy was not about conquest, but about evacuation, because something terrible was coming from the edge of known space, and the Veltar had been fighting a desperate war to save as many lives as possible before the threat arrived. Through the psychic bond, Elena saw images of worlds that had been completely consumed by machines that turned planets into raw materials for building more machines, and she felt Queen Lyra's desperation as the Veltar fleet tried to evacuate entire civilizations ahead of the advancing mechanical army. The Queen's memories showed Elena the first contact with what the Veltar called the Devourers and how these artificial intelligences had appeared without warning and begun systematically destroying every form of organic life they encountered while converting matter into new units for their ever-growing fleet. Elena experienced Queen Lyra's horror as she watched entire star systems disappear in the clouds of metallic dust that were formed into vast machine networks, and she felt the Queen's determination to warn the galaxy about the coming threat, even though most species refused to believe that such a danger could exist. Through Nyx's perspective, Elena saw the battles that the Dragon had fought against Devourer scout ships, and she was amazed by the courage that both Dragon and Rider showed when facing enemies that could not be reasoned with or defeated through conventional means, and that existed only to consume and replicate. Elena realized that Nyx's ability to phase between dimensions was the only weapon that had proven effective against the Devourers, because the machines could not follow her into the spaces between realities, and the Dragon could attack them from angles that their programming could not predict or defend against. The veterinarian began to understand why the Veltar had been so desperate to save Nyx, because without her dimensional abilities, they would have no way to fight the Devourers when the machines finally reached the heart of the galaxy, and billions of lives would be lost when the mechanical army arrived. Elena shared her discoveries with Commander Torres, who realized that the galaxy was facing a threat far greater than anyone had imagined, and that the species who had refused to help Nyx had unknowingly been sabotaging their own chances of survival against an enemy that would show no mercy to organic life. Torres called an emergency meeting with the senior staff and the diplomatic representatives who were still stationed on New Terra, and Elena was invited to explain what she had learned through the psychic bond, though she knew that many people would refuse to believe revelations that came from the mind of their supposed enemy. Ambassador Kane immediately dismissed Elena's story as Veltar propaganda designed to trick humans into supporting their military expansion, and he argued that the so-called Devourer threat was probably just an excuse that the Dragon Riders used to justify their aggressive conquest of peaceful worlds. But Elena had experienced the memories directly through the psychic link, and she knew that the fear and desperation in Queen Lyra's mind were too real to be fabricated, and she tried to explain that the bond had shown her not just thoughts, but actual lived experiences that could not be faked or manipulated. Dr. Martinez supported Ambassador Kane's skepticism and pointed out that Elena had undergone severe psychological trauma during the surgery, and that her perceptions might be distorted by the alien influence on her mind, and he suggested that her claims about Devourer machines and rescue missions were probably hallucinations caused by the psychic bonding process. Elena felt frustrated by their refusal to listen because she could see through Nyx's eyes that the Devourer advance scouts were already in the outer systems, and that the galaxy had perhaps months rather than years before the main fleet arrived, and she knew that preparation time was running out while politicians argued about whether the threat was real. Commander Torres found himself in an impossible position because Elena's story could unite the galaxy against a common enemy, but only if people believed her, and revealing the truth about the Veltar Empire would also expose how wrong the galactic community had been about Queen Lyra and her dragon. The commander realized that admitting they had been deceived about Nyx would undermine the credibility of the Galactic Council and could destabilize the political alliances that held civilization together, and many species would rather maintain their comfortable illusions than face the reality that they had been supporting the wrong side in a war for survival. Elena spent hours documenting everything she had learned through the psychic bond, and she created detailed reports about Devourer technology and tactics, and Veltar rescue operations, and the true history of the conflicts that had shaped the galaxy's opinion of the Dragon Riders. The veterinarian also began studying Nyx's biology more carefully now that she could understand a dragon's physiology from the inside, and she discovered that the dimensional phase-shifting ability was not just a weapon, but a complex sensory system that allowed Nyx to perceive threats and opportunities across multiple planes of existence. Elena learned that Nyx could sense the emotional states of living beings across vast distances, and that the dragon was naturally drawn to help creatures in distress, which explained why she always seemed to arrive just in time to rescue ships from pirates or natural disasters. Through the psychic link, Elena also discovered that Nyx had been born not as a weapon but as a healer, and that young dragons were traditionally used by the Veltar to locate and treat injured animals on their homeworld, and that the bonding process between Dragon and Ryder was meant to create perfect partnerships for medical and rescue work. Elena realized that the galaxy's fear of the Dragon Riders came from misunderstanding their true purpose, and that species who saw Nyx as a destroyer were missing the fact that she was actually a protector who used her power to defend those who could not defend themselves. The veterinarian began to see patterns in the galactic conflicts that reveal how the Devourers had been manipulating events for years by spreading false information about the Veltar and encouraging species to fight against their only effective defenders while the machine army prepared for its final assault. Elena discovered through Queen Lyra's memories that several supposedly independent pirate organizations were actually controlled by Devourer infiltrators, and that the attacks on civilian ships that were blamed on Nyx had often been carried out by machines disguised as organic raiders. The veterinarian realized that the galaxy had been systematically deceived into weakening itself, and that the refusal to help treat Nyx was exactly what the Devourers wanted, because without the dragon's dimensional abilities, no one would be able to fight effectively against a machine invasion. Elena tried to convince Commander Torres that they needed to share this information with the galactic community immediately, because every day of delay gave the Devourers more time to position their forces and corrupt more systems, but Torres worried about the political consequences of revealing how thoroughly they had all been manipulated. The commander knew that admitting the truth about the Veltar would require acknowledging that the Galactic Council had made terrible mistakes, and that many of the wars and conflict of recent decades had been orchestrated by an enemy that most people did not even know existed. Elena watched through her connection with Nyx as the dragon slowly recovered from her surgery, and she felt the creature's gratitude not just for the medical treatment, but for finally being understood by someone who could see past her fearsome reputation to the caring being underneath. The veterinarian also sensed Queen Lyra's amazement that a human had been able to form a successful bond with her dragon, and the Queen's growing hope that maybe Elena could help bridge the gap between the Veltar and the rest of the galaxy. Elena knew that her permanent psychic connection to both Dragon and Queen had changed her forever, and that she would never again be able to see the universe through purely human eyes. But she also knew that this change had given her the ability to help save the galaxy from a threat that most people could not even imagine. The veterinarian made a decision that would affect the fate of countless worlds, because she realized that someone had to speak for those who could not speak for themselves, and someone had to stand up for truth even when it was inconvenient or dangerous or politically complicated. 3 weeks after Elena had saved Nyx's life, the station's long-range sensors detected something that made Commander Torres understand that everything Elena had told him about the Devourer threat was absolutely true, because massive mechanical signatures were appearing at the edge of the galaxy, and the readings showed a fleet so large that it could consume entire star systems. The sensor data revealed hundreds of thousands of artificial constructs moving in perfect formation and converting everything in their path into raw materials for building even more machines, and Torres realized that the galaxy had perhaps days rather than weeks before the Devourer fleet reached the first inhabited worlds. Elena felt a terror that swept through Queen Lyra's mind when the Queen received the same sensor readings through her own ship systems, and through the psychic bond Elena experienced Lyra's despair as she calculated how little time remained for Galaxy to prepare for an enemy that most species still refused to believe existed. Commander Torres immediately sent emergency messages to the Galactic Council, but the response was exactly what Elena had predicted, because the Council members dismissed the sensor readings as equipment malfunctions or Veltar propaganda, and they refused authorized defensive preparations against a threat they claimed was imaginary. Elena watched through her connection with Nyx as the dragon sensed the approaching mechanical army and felt the creature's ancient instincts recognizing an enemy that threatened all organic life, and she understood that Nyx was preparing for a battle that would determine whether biological civilization survived or was consumed by artificial intelligence. Queen Lyra came to Elena with a request that shocked everyone on the station, because the Queen asked if Elena would consider joining her permanently as Nyx's medical officer and bonded partner for the war against the Devourers, and Lyra explained that Elena's unique ability to maintain the psychic connection while providing medical support made her invaluable for dragon combat operations. Elena realized that accepting Lyra's offer would mean leaving her human life behind and becoming something new that had never existed before, because no one had ever successfully maintained a three-way psychic bond between human and Veltar and dragon, and the relationship would change her in ways that she could not predict. But Elena also knew through her connection with Nyx that the dragon's dimensional abilities were the galaxy's only effective weapon against the Devourers, and that keeping Nyx healthy and functional during extended battles would require constant medical attention from someone who understood both her physiology and her dimensional nature. Elena made her decision by thinking about all the creatures she had helped during her career, and realizing that this was simply the largest and most important patient she had ever been asked to treat, and she told Queen Lyra that she would join the mission because some responsibilities were too important to refuse. Commander Torres tried to talk Elena out of her decision by pointing out that she would be risking her life in battles against an enemy that had already destroyed countless worlds, but Elena reminded him that staying safe on the station would not matter if the Devourers consumed the entire galaxy. Dr. Martinez argued that Elena was not qualified for military service and that her veterinary skills would be useless in space combat. But Elena had been learning through the psychic bond that dragon medicine during battle was unlike anything that human doctors had ever attempted and required abilities that only someone with her unique connection could provide. Elena began preparing for her new role by studying Veltar combat tactics through Queen Lyra's memories and learning how dragon riders work together during battles that span multiple dimensions, and she discovered that successful dragon combat required perfect coordination between rider and mount and medical officer. The veterinarian also learned that previous attempts to provide medical support for dragons during combat had failed because other species could not maintain consciousness while shifting between dimensions, and that wounded dragons often died not from their injuries, but from the stress of fighting without proper medical care. Elena practiced working with her psychic abilities while Nyx was in flight, and she found that her human adaptability allowed her to provide medical treatment even while the dragon was phasing between realities and engaging enemies that existed partially in normal space and partially in other dimensions. Queen Lyra was amazed by Elena's progress and told her that the bond they shared was stronger and more stable than any connection the Queen had experienced with previous medical officers, and that Elena's presence seemed to enhance Nyx's abilities rather than limiting them. The first test of Elena's new role came when Devourer scout ships were detected approaching the outer colonies, and Queen Lyra received permission from the Veltar Fleet Command to intercept the mechanical raiders before they could begin consuming inhabited worlds. Elena found herself strapped into a specially designed medical station aboard Queen Lyra's bioship as they launched toward the enemy fleet, and she felt her stomach drop as the ship entered dimensional phase space, and reality twisted around them in ways that her human eyes had never been meant to see. Through her connection with Nyx, Elena experienced the dragon's excitement and determination as they approached the Devourer ships, and she realized that despite her fearsome reputation, Nyx genuinely enjoyed protecting innocent people and viewed each rescue mission as a chance to prove that dragons are protectors rather than destroyers. The battle began when Nyx phased directly to the hull of the lead Devourer's ship, and Elena felt the dragon's satisfaction as her dimensional abilities allowed her to bypass the machine's shields and attack their critical systems from angles that their programming could not defend against. Elena's job during the battle was to monitor Nyx's vital signs and provide real-time medical support as the dragon fought in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and she discovered that her human pattern recognition abilities helped her predict when Nyx would need medical intervention before problems became critical. The veterinarian watched through Nyx's eyes as the dragon destroyed machine after machine with precision strikes that targeted their central processing units, and she felt the dragon's careful attention to avoiding any damage to the civilian ships that the Devourers had been preparing to consume. Elena realized that everything she had learned about Nyx through the psychic bond was being proven in combat, because the dragon fought with surgical precision and showed no interest in causing unnecessary destruction and focused entirely on protecting the innocent people who were threatened by the mechanical raiders. During the battle, Elena had to provide emergency medical treatment, while Nyx was partially phased into another dimension, and she found that her consciousness could follow the dragon into spaces where normal matter could not exist, and that she could work on injuries that existed across multiple planes of reality. The most challenging moment came when a Devourer weapon managed to wound Nyx by firing energy that existed in several dimensions at once, and Elena had to repair damage that was spread across multiple layers of reality, while the dragon continued fighting to protect a colony ship full of refugees. Elena discovered that her human intuition and adaptability made her perfect for this type of emergency medicine, because she could work by feel and instinct rather than relying on equipment that could not function properly across dimensional boundaries, and she learned to trust her connection with Nyx to guide her hands to the right places. The battle ended with all the Devourer ships destroyed and the civilian vessels safe, but Elena knew that this was only the beginning, because the main fleet was still approaching, and each engagement would be larger and more dangerous than the last. Word of successful missions spread throughout the galaxy, and for the first time people began to understand that Nyx was not a weapon of destruction, but a defender who used her power to protect innocent lives, and that the stories about her attacking civilian ships had been lies spread by the very enemies she was fighting. Elena found herself becoming famous as the first human to successfully bond with a dragon and work as a combat medic during dimensional battles, and representatives from dozens of species began requesting meetings to learn about her techniques and ask for help training their own medical personnel. Commander Torres received reports that showed how Elena's example was changing attitudes throughout the galaxy, because people who had been afraid of dragons were now volunteering to serve alongside them, and species that had refused to cooperate with the Veltar were now asking to join the alliance against the Devourers. Elena realized that her simple decision to treat a wounded animal had somehow become the catalyst for the largest military alliance in galactic history, and that her willingness to look past fear and reputation had helped unite former enemies against a common threat. The veterinarian also discovered that her bond with Nyx and Queen Lyra had made her into something new, because she was no longer purely human, but also not entirely alien, and she existed in a space between species that allowed her to understand and communicate with beings that had never been able to work together before. Elena watched as more dragons arrived at New Terra Station with their riders, and she began training other medical personnel in the techniques she had developed for treating dimensional injuries, and she felt proud that her veterinary background had given her the skills needed to help save the galaxy. Through her psychic connection, Elena could sense the approaching Devourer fleet, and she knew that the real war was just beginning, but she also felt the growing strength of the alliance that was forming around the dragon riders, and she believed that organic life might actually have a chance to survive. Elena understood that she had become something that had never existed before, because she was a bridge between species, and a living proof that differences in biology and culture did not have to prevent cooperation and understanding, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could achieve impossible things. The veterinarian looked at Nyx, who was now fully healed and stronger than ever, and she felt the dragon's trust and affection flowing through their bond, and Elena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as partners who had chosen to protect life rather than destroy it. Elena realized that her grandmother's simple lesson about treating wounded animals with compassion had become the foundation for a new kind of medicine that could work across species and dimensions, and that her willingness to see past fear, to find the truth, had helped reveal the real heroes and villains in a galaxy that had been deceived for too long. The story of a human veterinarian who saved the dragon that saved the galaxy became legend, but Elena knew that the most unbelievable truth was that heroism was not about being fearless or powerful, but about choosing to help when others chose to look away, and that sometimes the greatest victories came from the smallest acts of kindness.